Peace. My name is Jessica. I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you via Powerscope. I really do appreciate them taking the opportunity to give women a platform to share with each other, because our experiences, what we're experiencing, the purpose of going through the things we go through is to share with each other so we can learn through these things. So I really do appreciate being given this opportunity to share with you. When I was asked to speak, and when I was asked to do a video for Powerscope, I procrastinated for months. It wasn't just a procrastination. I was not going to do it. I convinced myself I didn't need to do it. I convinced myself, honestly, that I could not do it. That's what I convinced myself of. I kept telling myself that I had nothing of value to say. I kept telling myself that even if I did have something of value to say, how do I know people would receive it as such? And then I also had to think to myself, well, what if I put out this video and it's not what they're looking for? What makes me an expert on anything to speak on anything? And I had to reflect on what I was feeling, as I do with just about everything I do. Every behavior, every action I take, I try to reflect on why I made that choice and why I took that action. My educational background is in behavioral health. I study developmental psychology and I work in behavioral health. So a lot of what I do is about understanding why we do what we do. And so I always take time to reflect on what actions I take and how I interact with people and how I treat myself. And so when this came to be, I took some time, I took some time away from social media. I deleted my Instagram and Facebook for a couple of weeks. And I really sat back and had to reflect on why I made the decision to not do the video. And it was about fear. I had to identify the emotion, and it was fear. I was terrified. I was terrified that even if I did speak wholeheartedly with all of my heart and with every bit of knowledge I had, that no one would see value in it. I was afraid that if I did speak out, that someone would judge me. I was afraid that I would be held accountable for the things that I was saying. I was afraid that if I was held accountable, that someone would find that what I was saying was faulty or false or might be ingenuine and not truthful. And so I held on to all this fear, and I came to understand that it was an irrational fear, because I know myself, and I know that I move in truth, and I know that I'm honest, and I know that even though I'm not an expert in everything, I'm an expert in myself. I know what my experiences are, and I know about my own self-growth, and that's why I chose to speak on self-growth and emotional intelligence, because I found that in my journey in finding myself, and not really finding myself because I've always been here, but in truly understanding myself, that emotional intelligence was a huge part of understanding who I was. And not just who I was within myself, but who I was in my community. I had to understand why I was communicating with my sisters in a certain way. Why was I communicating with my brothers in a certain way? Why was I dealing with community issues in a certain way? Certain situations in my family and my tribe. I reflect on how I respond to these things every single day. And that's because our emotions, they're natural. They happen. They're natural reactions to our environment. They're supposed to be. Jealousy is supposed to remind us of the important values that we have in our relationships. Anger is supposed to remind us in moments of injustice and in moments of unmet needs that we do require certain things, and it's okay to demand those things in a respectful way. You know, sadness is meant to happen. It's meant to remind us of all those beautiful moments in our lives. It's in order to help us appreciate all those beautiful moments in our lives. Every emotion has a purpose, and fear has its purpose as well. Fear is almost like our subconscious giving our consciousness an ability to look into ourselves. It's giving us an opportunity to look deeper within ourselves to understand what it is we're feeling. With fear, it's kind of one of those things that's the trick to emotional intelligence is not allowing emotion to dictate our behaviors. Just because you're angry, it doesn't mean you have to deal with a situation with aggression. Just because we're sad doesn't mean that we need to come from a place of extreme emotion, a place of tears and yelling and screaming. It doesn't mean that we have to respond in that way. It doesn't mean that we have to isolate ourselves. It means that we have to acknowledge that the emotion is happening and acknowledge why it's happening. When this video came about, I realized that I have a major issue with fear. I allow fear to cripple me from doing a lot of things. And I think we all kind of deal with fear in that realm. We allow fear to cripple us. We allow it to limit our abilities in building new relationships, not just with the opposite sex or with people that we might find to be our spouses, but with our peers, with our friends, with our co-workers. It impedes us from taking chances in business endeavors and becoming more independent. It keeps us from self-growth, from diving too deep within ourselves and really understanding what's really going on. And a lot of times, fear is what keeps us from acknowledging certain emotions. We don't want to acknowledge the fact that we're feeling jealous because there's a whole negative connotation behind jealousy. We don't want to acknowledge the fact that we're sad because we don't want the world to think that we're broken, because that's the label that the world has put on the emotion of sadness and anxiety. And even fear. Sometimes fear keeps us from admitting that we are afraid. But every emotion needs some kind of control. Just because it's natural and it's natural occurring and it happens and it's a natural reaction doesn't mean that we have to allow ourselves to fall victim to those emotions. Even in nature, as wild as a river is, it still needs a dam to redirect its path from destruction. And if it's not a man-made dam, beavers naturally make dams. A tree will fall and redirect that river and redirect its water flow. It happens naturally, and it's the same thing with our emotions. It doesn't stop, right? A dam doesn't stop a river from flowing, it just redirects it. And having control of our emotions doesn't stop the emotions from happening, it just redirects our behavior. It just keeps us from making irrational decisions, like never posting a video that could have reached somebody that needed to hear a message. And understanding that, no, I am not an expert. And posting this video and sending this video is not telling the world that I'm an expert, but it's telling the world that I have a message and that I'm brave enough to share that message. I hope this reaches a sister. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share. Peace.